Huh?
As I went walking
What?
that ribbon of highway,
I can't hear you. Where's my
I
microphone?
saw above me
Where is it?
that
It's here?
endless
Oh.
skyway.
Oh, okay,
I
thank you.
saw below
Listen,
me
tonight we're gonna
golden
talk about
valley.
free healthcare,
This land
free
was
college,
made for you and me.
and for every single person that votes
I
for me,
roamed and rambled
Werther's Originals, because who doesn't like a nice caramel in their pocket?
from the
Tonight,
sparkling sands
we're talking about me,
of your diamond
Bernie
deserts.
Sanders.
And all around me, a voice was sounding. This land was made for you and me.
I love that tune. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the avowed socialist in this presidential race, Bernie Sanders. Now, the interesting thing about him is I actually have some positive things to say about him. For one, of all the politicians that are in this race, he seems to be the most trustworthy. I mean, he's an honest guy. He comes right out and tells you, I am a socialist, a democratic socialist. Now, whether you agree or disagree with his policy stances, at least he's being upfront. We just went through years of going through elections with Obama and Hillary where they were claiming one thing and then doing another. Obama and Hillary both were saying that they were against gay marriage before they got into office, and then both were for it when they got into office. So with the constant flip-flopping, I have to say it's actually refreshing to see a candidate that's running for office that at least is honest on where he stands. I think it's hard to talk about Bernie Sanders without bringing up Ted Cruz and Donald Trump. These three are the leading candidates in the race right now, despite Hillary's #1 position on the Democratic side, which is actually due to some corrupt primary system with superdelegates. But if you actually look at who the people are voting for, you have Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, and Ted Cruz. These three candidates are what we call insurgent candidates. They're not part of the establishment. They're the outsiders. You have Donald Trump, who's the business person who's coming into the race and approaching his policies from a business standpoint and that kind of structure. You also have Ted Cruz coming from Texas, who told his constituents that he would go and fight against Obamacare on Capitol Hill, and he spent 21 hours filibustering it. Then you have Bernie Sanders, the avowed socialist, and even though those of us on the right will say that there's socialists all over the party, they certainly don't want to come right out and say that to people because there's the label of progressivism that's spread throughout the Republicans and the Democrats. And the definition of progressive is to slowly make these changes over time. Bernie Sanders is just coming right out and saying, we need to do this and do this now. It's interesting to take a look at the actual supporters of Bernie Sanders because I have to wonder to myself, did they even take an economics class in high school? Because to me, this might be a failure of the educational system, maybe not to blame on them themselves. So here's the economic reality of what we're facing in America today. The national debt currently sits at around $19 trillion. Every time a baby is born, as soon as they take their first breath, the amount that they owe towards that national debt is $1,006,000. Economists have taken a look at Bernie Sanders' policies, and as they study them, they actually see that his plans will double that national debt to $38 trillion. That means that now when a baby's born, the contribution that they owe towards that national debt is $2,012,000. So here's where we come into the problems. When people like me are talking to Bernie Sanders supporters and we talk about how he wants to raise taxes on everyone, their immediate response is that they want to raise taxes on the extremely rich. But if you actually look at it, you could tax the wealthiest people in America, the top 10%, at 100% of their income, and you still won't be able to pay for Bernie Sanders' plans. But let's play out Bernie Sanders' plan for a moment here. Let's say that we actually do go through with that and we tax the richest people in America. Well, over the course of time, you're now creating a new problem. If the national debt doubles to $38 trillion, now you have a new problem that you have to face. Well, how do you fix that? Well, any Democrat or person left of Democrat, their answer is always, raise the taxes! Da, 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 da. So let's take a look at two of the biggest key issues that a Bernie Sanders supporter is looking at. That is the cost of education in the college level and the cost of healthcare in America. Now, the way I look at it as a constitutionalist is filtering it through the actual founding document itself. Is free healthcare constitutional? Is free college education constitutional? The answer is no. You can't filter it through that and see that it's part of the Constitution that this is a right that would be granted to you. When you think about these problems, what you actually have to do is dissect them further. So if we take a look at college education, one of the biggest costs that comes down for that is the cost of the faculty salaries. Another huge cost to universities is their bloating expansions to attract new students. And while sports may cover some of that and attract new students, it's really a growing problem, and you see a lot more people nowadays with the rising cost of education turning to online universities where you get rid of this physical realm that you have to go to learn these things. So the real question is, how do we fix this? And one of the ways is one of the things that I just mentioned, which is online universities and online education. By doing this, by following through with this and disregarding the traditional notion that you have to go off to a university to get your education, you actually speak with your money. Instead of showing up and paying the costs to go into the classrooms and the university gear and the dormitories and everything, you are saying, I don't need to go there and support these bloating costs by being a part of the physical campus. I can do all this from home and pay a heck of a lot less. So why can't college be free? Why does cost matter? Well, for that I have a question and a comment. What is so special between the individuals that graduate from high school? What separates everyone? Because they've all graduated with a degree from high school. That's it. Nothing separates them. There's no difference between all those people. So if they were about to enter the workforce from there, there's nothing that separates them. Now, when you add in the cost of college, you actually have this mental discretion that individuals have to go through to look for a college that fits them and fits the needs of the degree that they're trying to achieve. Once they go there, they are specialized in that training, into that education, and graduate with that degree, separating themselves from everyone else in the field. So cost does matter because it actually separates those people, individuals, to the employers that they eventually get hired by. Now let's switch gears over to the healthcare issue. So if we take a deeper look at that, where are those costs coming from? Well, one of the main issues with healthcare costs is obviously insurance. So why does insurance cost so much? Well, for one, if you look at the free market and how free market principles work, cost is driven down or up by the amount of competition that exists within a certain realm. When it comes to insurance companies across America, you're only allowed to compete with other companies within the same state. This means that if you're in Pennsylvania, perhaps, your insurance company is not competing with another insurance company that may be in California. Another cost that goes into healthcare is the frivolous malpractice suits that keep on plaguing hospitals. Things that people sue for that maybe they shouldn't be, just to get more extra money from the hospitals themselves. Now, what leads to the increase in costs? Well, say you have a problem and the doctor believes that it might be cancer. He might send you for a CAT scan and a PET scan, and that might be it. But nowadays, with the type of lawsuits that are out there, he has to cover all his bases to make sure that he's not missing anything. So you may go for an x-ray, an ultrasound, a CAT scan, a PET scan. I mean, there's extra blood tests. There's all these different tests that you would have to go through to make sure that he's not missing anything. But he may know, because of his education and because of things that he's seen in his practice, exactly what the problem is. But he can't take that chance of being sued. So now let's take a look at some of the solutions for these. The Republicans for the past couple of years, since right before Obamacare, have proposed opening the borders for competition between insurance companies, which would open it up to basically 50 times more insurance companies being able to compete against each other in the country. Cross-border competition would start to lower costs because now, instead of dealing with other insurance companies within your state, you're dealing with insurance companies across the country. Another solution that the Republicans proposed during the passing of Obamacare is tort reform. This would take a closer look at the frivolous lawsuits put against the hospitals and actually cut down on those through a bunch of different measures. The question that Americans should have been asking themselves during the passing of Obamacare is, what are we actually looking at? Is it the healthcare costs or the healthcare itself? Because the word healthcare is what was getting thrown around the most. I would always tell my friends to take a look at the healthcare issue. Do we have a healthcare problem here in America? I know I certainly wasn't stepping over anyone dying in the streets in front of a hospital because they were refused care. There may have been an insurance problem. Maybe they couldn't get insurance, maybe they couldn't get covered, but even if they weren't getting covered, they were able to walk into a hospital and get that care. Now, What they might have a problem with is debt later on in life, but at least they'd be alive to have that debt. Compare that with socialist countries across the world that have universal healthcare type systems. For instance, up in Canada, I've talked to people up there that have told me that in order to get a biopsy to find out if you have cancer, sometimes the waiting period to get that biopsy itself, just the initial test to find that you have cancer, could take up to 6 months, unless you grease the doctors to get in there. Just a couple years ago over in England, there were patients that were super gluing their own teeth because the waiting period to get to the dentist was such a long waiting list that they were in so much pain they had to take care of their teeth themselves. Another problem that the UK was facing in regards to their universal healthcare programs for healthcare is that they were experiencing extremely long wait period times in the ER. To fix this, because the time that's spent in the ER starts when you walk through the door, the government's solution to this problem was to keep patients in the ambulances for longer periods of time, up to hours at a time, before putting them through the doorway to go into the ER, where they'd wait an additional couple hours. But it wasn't until they entered the door that that new system kicked into place and started the time. These are the kinds of solutions that governments that embrace universal healthcare systems come up with. And it's ridiculous. It's the patients that hurt in the end. I have another question for my Bernie Sanders supporters. The rich in other countries, no matter where it is around the world, the extremely rich, where do they go for their health care? Even if they live in one of these grand universal healthcare societies, the fact of the matter is, if they have the money, they leave those countries to come to the US because we have the best healthcare. We have the best research that goes into things, and we have the best technology and cures for everything as well. Everything that happens with healthcare usually emanates from the United States. So, I get it. When it comes to the capitalist society and free market and everything, there's been problems, there's been stumbles, there's been crony capitalism, there's been big businesses that have taken advantage of the consumers and ship jobs overseas and everything, which I would actually attribute to the corporate tax rate here in America put on by the government that drives those businesses away and those jobs to fall. But when you take a look at capitalism versus socialism, there's a stark difference from the rest of the world. So what is capitalism? Well, capitalism nurtures the entrepreneurial spirit of an individual here in America and takes their abilities and helps propel them forward through the broken chains of government having resistance on you and allowing you to pursue an unlimited potential in your business ventures. So what's the difference with socialism? Socialism caps the potential wages of that individual by instituting what they believe is a fair and equal system. Now, this is the kind of system that encourages laziness from the hard workers of that society, because by going that extra mile, they benefit none from doing that, and encourages those that are already lazy to further not participate in that economy because they're already being taken care of by the government. So what is that government system? Well, that government system would be supported by the people and their taxes. So the lazy continue being lazy, and the hard workers continue to get screwed by the government because they end up paying for everything, and that money then trickles through the government, and the government gets to throw it towards these individuals that are mooching and say, look what we have done for you. A while ago, Bernie Sanders did an interview, and in it, he praised the socialist mentality of breadlines. Now, breadlines are what you may have heard from those of us on the right, where we say, well, if you get into a socialist system, you're going to be waiting in breadlines for your food, or waiting for your bucket of rice or whatever it is that you're going to the grocery store for that's mandated and portioned to you. Well, in this interview, Bernie Sanders actually praised breadlines, saying that at least you're getting food, as seen here.
It's funny, sometimes American journalists talk about how bad a country is because people are lining up for food. That's a good thing. In other countries, people don't line up for food. The rich get the food and the poor starve to death.
So how about once again, I actually praise Bernie Sanders for another thing. In a recent debate with Hillary, he said this in regards to suing the gun manufacturers for violent crimes.
As I understand, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but what you are essentially saying, what people are saying, is that if somebody who is crazy or a criminal or a horrible person goes around shooting people, the manufacturer of that gun should be held liable. And if that is your position, then what you are saying, essentially, if that is the case, as I understand it, it's not what Secretary Clinton is talking about. I agree with what she said. But if that is the case, then essentially your position is there should not be any guns in America, period.
That is,
now, I
that is
understand.
like the NRA position.
Can I finish, please? All right? And there are people who hold that view, and that's fine if you hold it. I think what you do is you hold those people who have used the gun accountable. You try to make guns as safe as possible, but I would disagree.
Now, just prior to his answer, let's take a look at what Hillary had to say.
Because of the proliferation of guns, because of the epidemic of gun violence in our country, there were a group of cities, states, and other concerned people who, in the late 90s and in the early 2000s, were working on legal theories that they thought would force gun makers to do more to make guns safer and force sellers to be much more responsible. The NRA saw this happening, and they said, we've got to stop it. Last thing in the world we want is to have guns that you can only shoot with your fingerprint, or to have guns with such strong safety locks on them that they may not be sellable. So the NRA went to the Congress, and the head of the NRA has said this was the most important NRA legislation in more than 20 years. And they basically went to the Congress. I was there. I was in the Senate. And they said, give us absolute immunity. No other industry in America has absolute immunity, and they sell products all the time.
Do you hear the crowd's reaction in the background throughout that whole argument? It's all out of ignorance for these people. This is exactly why we have lawsuit problems in this country. So why is Bernie Sanders right in this case and Hillary Clinton's wrong? Well, let's take a look at a different type of example. Take guns out of the equation for a second. Every year in America, and probably around the world, there are more deaths caused by car accidents or incidents than gun crimes. Let's take the case of a hit and run in a car accident. Is the car manufacturer responsible for the death of the person that got hit by the car? Of course not. That would be ridiculous. But once again, when it comes to the left and those that support these people, we keep on making arguments based on emotion instead of looking at common sense. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. This actually concludes our look at the candidates that are running for president in 2016. If you'd like to subscribe to my channel, you can click over here. Or you can click over here to take a look at my analysis of John Kasich and Ben Carson, or the last one, which was Hillary Clinton. Please click on like and share below so that you can let your friends see the policy stances or the corruption in regards to Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders before they go into the primary voting booths or the general election voting booths. So the next time we get together, we're actually going to be taking a look at what turned me from a moderate Republican Democrat into a constitutional conservative. Until then, I'm the Generation Y conservative. Thanks for watching. You know, I find it really interesting that within the last 2 election cycles, we went from voting for a man that a lot of people said was a physical specimen. I mean, a lot of people were going crazy over the fact of, oh, Obama's at the beach in Hawaii getting out of the water and he's a perfect specimen getting out with his physique. And now we're going to Bernie Sanders, who's this crusty old man. And the question they're asking him, if it was the same way as looking at Obama, is, hey, what kind of underwear do you wear? Depends. What does it depend on? No, depends. That's what I wear. Get me my prune juice. Ah.